October 2022, a startup called Jasper raises $125 million at a $1.5 billion valuation, one of the fastest companies in AI history to reach unicorn status. Real revenue, real customers, a product people actually used every day. The investors who backed them weren't amateurs. Bessemer Venture Partners, the firm behind Shopify, LinkedIn, and Twilio. Insight Partners, HubSpot Ventures. They all looked at Jasper and said, "This is the future." They were right about the future. They were just wrong about who was going to own it. 30 days after that $125 million closed, OpenAI launched ChatGPT. And within months, Jasper was laying off staff, cutting its own valuation and watching its revenue get cut in half. To understand how a billion-dollar company can collapse that fast, we need to go back to where it started. Dave Rogenmoser, Chris Hull, and John Morgan had been building things together since 2014. They weren't first-time founders chasing a trend. Before Jasper, they had built a Y Combinator-backed startup called Proof, a tool for improving website conversion rates. These were people who understood marketing, understood software, and had the kind of quiet credibility that comes from having actually shipped products to real customers. In late 2020, through their Y Combinator connections, Dave got early access to GPT-3, at the time the most powerful AI language model ever made publicly available. He sat down, typed a few prompts, and watched it write marketing copy. The insight was simple. Every marketing team on Earth spends half their week staring at a blank page. What if they didn't have to? On January 15th, 2021, they launched as Conversion.ai. Within 6 months, they were spending $1 million a month on ads. By the end of that first year, 9 people were running a company doing $35 million in annual recurring revenue. The product worked, the market was real, the money was flowing. There was just one thing nobody was asking yet, a question buried underneath all that growth that would eventually become the only question that mattered. By October 2022, Jasper had become something the startup world genuinely hadn't seen before. A generative AI company that hit unicorn status in under 2 years, built on real revenue with real customers. The investor list was a statement. Bessemer Venture Partners, Shopify, LinkedIn, Twilio. Insight Partners, HubSpot Ventures. These are not people who write $125 million checks on vibes. They employ entire teams whose only job is to find the holes in a story before signing. They all signed. The valuation? $1.5 billion. And from the outside, every number checked out. $42.5 million in ARR by end of 2021. Over 70,000 customers, a product that marketers genuinely loved. A founder who talked about the business the way people talk when they actually believe what they're saying. No buzzwords, no vague disruption talk. Just, here's the problem, here's what we built, here's who's paying for it. But there was one line in Jasper's cost structure that nobody on that cap table talked about publicly. One structural fact that made everything else sit on much thinner ice than it looked. Jasper didn't own its engine, it rented one. Every word Jasper wrote for its 70,000 customers was generated by OpenAI's models. The templates, the brand voice tools, the polished interface, all real, all valuable. But underneath it all, the actual intelligence belonged to someone else. And that someone else had plans of their own. The date is worth saying plainly. November 30th, 2022. That's when OpenAI launched ChatGPT, and within days, it was the fastest growing consumer product in the history of the internet. 1 million users in 5 days. 100 million in 2 months. It did everything Jasper did, and it was free. When OpenAI eventually added a paid tier, it was $20 a month, compared to Jasper's plans starting at $49. But here's what made this different from a normal competitive threat. Jasper wasn't being undercut by a rival. they were being undercut by their own supplier. The same company they were paying to power their product had just decided to sell that product directly to Jasper's customers for less. In the startup world, this has a name. It's called platform risk, and Jasper had it in the worst possible form. The moat they'd built, the templates, the workflows, the brand voice tools was real. But it was a moat around a castle they didn't own. The moment OpenAI offered the same features natively inside ChatGPT, the moat stopped mattering. By January 2023, Jasper had told investors to expect $90 million in annual recurring revenue that year. What actually happened next was something else entirely. The layoffs came in July 2023, 9 months after the $125 million raise. The company didn't publish exact numbers. What leaked out was that both full-time employees and contractors were cut. The 2023 revenue forecast had been revised significantly downward, and the internal value of employee stock had been quietly reduced by 20%. The way a company tells its own people without saying it out loud, the story we sold you when you joined is no longer the story we're in. Then September arrived. Dave Rogenmoser stepped down as CIO. John Morgan stepped down as CTO. Both founders gone from day-to-day leadership within weeks of each other. In their place, Timothy Young, former president of Dropbox, the kind of executive you bring in when the original story has run its course, and you need someone to run a different kind of company. The pivot was to enterprise. Stop fighting ChatGPT for individual marketers. Go up market. Sell to large teams that needed brand governance, approval workflows, security guarantees that a free tool couldn't offer. Enterprise ARR grew fourfold by late 2023. Real progress. But the overall numbers told a harder story. Revenue that had peaked around $120 million dropped to somewhere between $35 and $55 million by 2024. Nearly cut in half. The enterprise wins weren't enough to replace what the consumer business had been. Jasper was still standing, but it was a fundamentally different company than the one that had raised $1.5 billion 18 months earlier. And the question worth sitting with, the one that applies well beyond Jasper, is why nobody stopped it before it started. Here's what I keep thinking about with Jasper. The founders weren't fraudsters. The product was real. The problem was real. $35 million in ARR with 9 employees in the first year is one of the most impressive executions in startup history. Dave Rogenmoser saw GPT-3 early, understood what it could do for marketers, and moved fast. None of that was wrong. What was wrong was building a $1.5 billion business on the assumption that the company powering your product would never compete with you directly. And the uncomfortable part? A lot of people in that room in October 2022 probably knew this. Platform risk isn't an obscure concept. The history of tech is full of companies that built on top of someone else's platform and got wiped out the moment that platform changed the rules. These investors had watched it happen before. But the growth was real, the momentum was real. And when both of those things are true, it's very easy to convince yourself the risk is manageable. Right now, there are hundreds of companies raising hundreds of millions of dollars by wrapping AI models in better interfaces. Some will build something genuinely defensible, most won't. The question to ask about any of them, and honestly, about any business built on someone else's infrastructure, is a simple one. If the platform disappears, what's left? Jasper is still around, still serving enterprise clients, still trying to answer that question. But the $1.5 billion answer they thought they had in October 2022? That one didn't survive November. If this is the kind of story you want more of, subscribe, there's more.